All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are starting a new book, a wonderful study in the book of Ruth. And this book is, we will see, during the time of the judges. But this is such a contrast because as you know, as we have studied the book of Judges, was just one cycle after cycle after cycle of sin. There were only seasons of good. So you had good leaders such as Deborah. The most focused on how they had repeatedly sinned. Now, the book of Ruth has many layers to it. And then after the book of Ruth, when we get into Samuel, Samuel would be the last judge, okay, before the time of the kings. And again, it'd be a time of wickedness. Okay, so we get to that with Samuel. But the book of Ruth is a short book. As a writer, one of the brilliance of this book is that it's very concise, short. It's only 4 chapters, but the storyline is so concise but vivid in its message, which is amazing. It is a love story, not just a romance. Now, as we, think of romance novels, no. This is a love story. It will show us those of you that are single, it will show you. I'm married, so I can't say us, but I can tell you that I mirrored it, and I'll show you that later when we get into Ruth. How to pick a godly mate, and in this case, a godly. So, besides this being a love story. And then it's also going to show some of the virtues of that. Now, then you add to that Ruth came out of a pagan, the Moabites, a pagan society. And that even in these pagan society, you had people who knew God, found God, okay? And her life demonstrates that to the point that she marries a Jewish man by the name of Boaz. And then Ruth, who come out of Moab. And by the way, remember Moab, just the nation itself, was not to be admitted into the congregation of Israel. That's how wicked they were. Yet, as we also know by the law, that anyone who proselytes to the faith, to the Old Testament, the Hebrew religion or God, is accepted. And Ruth is one of them, to the point that she becomes she is the great grandmother of King David, which is extremely important, because this becomes the bloodline of Jesus going back to Abraham. And as we know, there are three. I'm trying to think of. There are 3 pagan women in the bloodline of Jesus. There was Tamar, who Judah slept with, and then there was Rahab, and then you have Ruth. So three of these women who were pagans, right, come out of pagan nations in the bloodline of Jesus. Their faith was just that strong. So because this is the time of Judges, they were under a severe famine, and this is what sets up the story of Judges. It was a severe famine, and so when I'm bringing this up because we also see that there's still judgment going on, and even good people suffer because of bad people's actions, and so this is one of them. Now, her mother-in-law Naomi, the key to this story as well, suffers some horrific tragedies in her life. In other words, pretty much her whole the famine caused them to leave their home, and then she loses her husband and 2 sons. Again, we say this, but then she becomes like the grandmother to Boaz and Ruth's son. Again, a fascinating story that even if this was a movie script, it's almost, the dynamics of screenwriting are kind of in this story. You can also say conflict, right? So a lot of stories, of course, in the Bible are like that. So let's get to it. The book of Ruth, chapter 1. It says, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons and lived in the land of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The name of the 2 sons was Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with their 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 children and without her husband. So again, we kind of cover over a 10-year period, and this, of course, bitter tragedy that kind of befell Naomi. Now, you will note the name Orpah, okay? And without right here, one of our most famous celebrities, Oprah, was kind of named after this name. And it's kind of interesting because people say, well, it was named after a biblical name, and it was. But a couple of things you need to know about this, which if you wanted to be poetic about this, you could see that it fits. But first, Oprah's mother switched the O and the R, so that you can see the biblical pronunciation of the name is Orpah, and then Oprah, it's O-P, then Oprah, however she wants to pronounce her name. So, verse 6, she said she and her daughter-in-laws prepared to leave the land of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's need by providing food. She left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, and traveled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. She said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord show faithful love to you as you have shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord enable each of you to find security in the houses of your new husbands. She kissed them, and they wept loudly. Now, she basically is saying, go back to your home. She's going back to her land in Judah. Verse 10, no, they said to her, we will go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to leave? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought it was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourself from remarrying? No, my daughters, my life is too much bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again, they wept loudly. And Oprah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her God. Follow your sister-in-law. Now, kind of interesting here. And if there's some good sermons that can come out of this, right? Oprah kissed her mother-in-law and left, but Ruth clung to her mother. So in other words, the tale of two people, and even though Oprah loved Naomi, she still left and returned to her home and to her gods. Verse 16. But Ruth replied, do not persuade me to leave you or go back and not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh punish me, and do so severely, if anything but death separates you from me. This is a great declaration of faith on Ruth's part. Your God is my God. Okay? And even though she was a Moabite, notice she came to have faith in the one and true God. Verse 18, and when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped trying to persuade her. And the two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. And when they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival. And the local women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Now remember, it's been over 10 years since she's been gone. Verse 20, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. She answered, for the Almighty has been very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has pronounced judgment on me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi came back from the land of Moab with her daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabitess, and they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley season. Now, it is sad. I mean, you can sense her bitterness. You can sense her hurt. You think about it, three loved ones, right? Her husband and two sons. So she was left alone in a foreign land. So you can sense her bitterness. I also say this, that even though you can sense her bitterness, and when she says that God's hand has been bitter against me, you understand that. What I will say, this is a very human story. And remember, as we're reading, that oftentimes we're reading from the perspective of, especially the Old Testament, that we're reading from the human perspective, okay? And then from time to time we get revelation, and that God lets us know what's going on. Coming up, we will see Job, for example, hitherto angel coming down, giving revelation from God. Moses receiving revelation from God. Okay, but and keep this in mind, that even though we're reading the Bible, we're reading the account of the Bible, it seems like that these manifestations, these revelations of God, were quite frequent, but in reality they weren't. For example, if you think about Moses, now the first generation that came out of Egypt was a little different in that they had a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, which was a perpetual, for 40 years, manifestation, of the presence of God. But in terms of those kinds of revelations that Moses had, they were spaced out over this 40 years. Now, I'm saying that to say, you understand there's no revelation from Naomi's perspective. And even sometimes even in this wicked period of Judges, and when things happen, then they ask the question, why do these things happen? Why is this happening? Because there's no revelation. They don't know. They don't always know, right, what and the what's and the why behind the scenes from God. So when she says, the Lord's hand has been bitter against me, we could go a step further and say, if God was to give a revelation, God may say, well, there were a lot of things that you guys did that brought that on. Your sons married a Moabitish woman, and that turned out to be a good thing later on, but they didn't know that. Who knows where they were leaving, Bethlehem to go to Moabite to find food, the land of the pagans. And so one of the lessons that's not kind of brought out in the book of Ruth is that sometimes when these bad things happen to us, the first inclination for us is to blame God, to say, well, God did that, without necessarily looking at ourselves and saying, well, Lord, well, what did I do, right? How can I straighten my course out? The first thing is, well, God did that. Now, Naomi also had, even though she did say God's hand was bitter against her, she was also humble before God as well. She did not curse God. She did not get, in my opinion, prideful against God. But this is a very interesting story. All right, so now they return home, and everybody is kind of shocked. I also say this, that Bethlehem itself wasn't the big metropolis. Bethlehem was kind of a small town, very, very small town. So, all right, chapter 2 in our next study. I'll see you then.